Welcome to Trauma Demystified, a podcast from Bright Horizon Therapies. I am Natalie Jovanich, a trauma counselor and resilience coach, and I'm glad to connect with you today. First of all, I want to apologize for the late release of this episode. I needed additional time to balance what to include since recovery from complex trauma is a vast subject. In today's episode, we'll explore the nature of complex trauma, how it shapes our experiences, and most importantly, the pathways to recovery. Healing from complex trauma is a journey, and I hope this episode gives you insight and hope for your recovery. My passion for trauma recovery comes from both my professional work and my lived experience. Growing up with childhood abuse, I know firsthand how deeply complex trauma can affect our sense of self, our emotions, and our relationships. I also know how much stigma still exists around it. But here's what I want you to remember. If you've experienced complex trauma, you're not broken and you're not alone. Even amid struggle, you carry strengths that are invaluable for your healing journey. In the memoir, I Brave to Story, I shared my healing journey from complex trauma and the resilience it takes to heal. In my work with my clients, I see the same courage every day. Recovery isn't linear and it doesn't happen overnight, but it is possible. Healing happens in small, steady steps, and each step you take matters. As always, take care of yourself while listening. If anything feels overwhelming, it's okay to pause, take a break, and return to it when you're ready. Take what resonates with you and leave the rest. Please note that this episode is like planting a seed. I'll share the concepts as an initial idea, but please remember that they can be more complex than I can explain in this episode. So we will dive deeper into them at a later stage. Now let's dive into today's episode. First, let's look at what complex trauma is and how it differs from single incident trauma. Many people use the word trauma broadly, but understanding the distinction can help you find the best options for your recovery. Single incident trauma happens when we experience one or more distressing events that overwhelm our capacity to process them emotionally. These events have a clear beginning and end, meaning a person can return to safety once they are over. So events can be natural disasters, it can also be accidents. In contrast, complex trauma occurs in ongoing, unsafe or violent environments. The harm is repetitive and prolonged, making it difficult or impossible to escape. Since complex trauma often involves relational trauma, it can affect our ability to trust, form secure relationships, and feel safe in the world. Overall, complex trauma is the most common form of trauma for which people seek support. Complex trauma refers to the profound and enduring emotional and relational adaptations that arise from repeated exposure to overwhelming and traumatic experiences. They often occur during early life or within relationships. Such experiences can create challenges, such as trust, self-regulation, and identity issues. But they also shape a person's strength. Too often we focus solely on the painful symptoms of complex trauma, but we overlook something important. People living with complex trauma also develop powerful inner resources and live successful lives. Just to give you an idea, people with complex trauma often have very creative coping strategies. They have a profound inner wisdom and profound intuition. Some of them have deep empathy for others. Many of them have a lot of accountability. Many of them have higher awareness of relational and social dynamics. And they have ability to navigate adversity and resilience. Therefore, I invite you to reflect not only on the symptoms you may be experiencing, but also on the inner strength and wisdom you already carry. Furthermore, symptoms will improve and can entirely disappear during your trauma recovery journey. Here are some of the common causes that might lead to complex trauma. Remember that the impact of a traumatic environment is different for each person. Therefore, some people may develop complex trauma, while others may not. If I share this list, be curious and use it for self-reflection. Furthermore, keep in mind that this list is not exhaustive. If your situation is not on the list, it doesn't mean it isn't valid. Here an overview about experiences that can cause complex trauma. Complex trauma can occur due to childhood abuse or growing up in a dysfunctional family. Additionally, being bullied at school may contribute to complex trauma. During childhood, complex trauma is often called developmental trauma or adverse childhood experiences. Generally, we are unable to handle these complex dynamics in our developmental years because we simply lack the capacity to do so as children. So we do the best we can to survive in these environments. If you have faced childhood abuse, the age at which the abuse has happened significantly can impact your recovery, and you need to really consider that when you look at your symptoms. Moreover, we risk developing complex trauma if we endure prolonged domestic violence or abusive relationships in adulthood, or if we face systemic violence such as racism and oppression. Additional factors that may lead to complex trauma include living in a war zone or fleeing our home countries to become refugees. If you want to delve deeper into the definition, please check out the episode Smart Goals for Trauma Recovery, where I present 3 categories for trauma. Complex trauma falls into category 2 and 3. These categories may provide you additional insights on how you can explore your story, and I leave a link in the description. So before I jump into looking at the symptoms of complex trauma, I just want to highlight that the medical model of psychology is really ineffective to heal from complex trauma. So the Western psychology often holds stigmatizing beliefs on the issue, as it is primarily based on the medical model. Therefore, it often attempts to simplify the complex dynamics that occur in our psyche after experiencing complex trauma to something as straightforward as a broken bone. Consequently, it frequently pathologizes intelligent survival strategies as disorders or stigmatizes individuals as if they are forever broken. These assumptions misalign with our current understanding of trauma and can impose an additional layer of harm on those who have faced complex trauma. For instance, it took me a long time to recognize and address how I had internalized stigma. I felt its true impact after publishing my memoir. Before that, I had harbored the naive hope that stigma would fade away, but it never did. Reflecting on my recovery, I can honestly say that the pain of stigma was as profound as the violence I experienced as a child. It was a difficult lesson for me to learn that while I was able to escape abusive family dynamics, I couldn't escape social stigma because it's systemic. Over time, I discovered empowering ways to manage it. I don't know how stigma has affected you, but I invite you to reflect on how you might have internalized stigmatizing beliefs. Moreover, Western psychology typically focuses on the individual, but neglects the systemic harm caused by racism, oppression, and colonization. The field remains centered around whiteness, and much of the research fails to acknowledge the profound impact of oppression on BIPOC individuals and other marginalized groups. Additionally, clever methods of resisting oppression are often misinterpreted as pathology instead of being understood within their systemic context. For example, silence in the face of racism can frequently be a form of self-preservation and resistance, and is a very valid mechanism to navigate systemic dynamics. Without an understanding of systemic violence, Western psychology operates under the false assumptions that we are all the same. This perspective is neither healthy nor accurate for the diverse world in which we live. Such a mindset can lead to victim blaming, where the individual targeted by oppression is additionally blamed for their experience and unfairly burdened. Similar to social stigma, even if you're healed from complex trauma, you will still encounter systemic oppression if you are trans, queer, a person of color, Black, Indigenous, or have other marginalized identities. Therefore, it's crucial to find strategy to empower yourself and resist as you continue your recovery journey. Please understand that any form of oppression is harmful and unacceptable. While it may be beyond your control whether the dominant group changes, you still have the power to explore strategies on how you can navigate and resist these forces. While I address oppression in this episode very superficially, I may not have covered all the specific context that shapes your experience. Therefore, I invite you to reflect on how oppression impacts your life based on where you live and the unique dynamic in your community. Why is it useful to understand the symptoms of complex trauma? Many people have experienced complex trauma, may not fully remember what happened to them, but they live with the symptoms every day. Recognizing these symptoms can be an important step to understand your experience. It's essential to realize that these symptoms are not signs of weakness or brokenness. Instead, they are intelligent coping mechanisms that your nervous system developed to help you survive overwhelming and extreme situations. Understanding the symptoms of complex trauma can guide you towards the appropriate support for your recovery. It helps you recognize patterns of behaviors, emotions, or physical reactions that there's nothing to be ashamed of, but they are protective strategies that were logical at the time, even if they no longer serve you today. Focusing on symptoms does not diminish your strength, resilience, or lived experiences. Many of these symptoms possess a protective intention, even if they manifest in ways you find distressing or challenging. A key step in healing is to embrace curiosity and compassion towards your symptoms, allowing you to understand them better and gently transform them. People who have experienced complex trauma may struggle with emotional regulation, either feeling overwhelmed by emotions like shame, fear, anger, or feeling numb and disconnected. They may experience chronic anxiety, depression, or a sense of emptiness. Difficulty with trust, relationships, and boundary settings are common, along with persistent feelings of danger and hypervigilance. Many also experience flashbacks, dissociation, body memories, low self-worth, or harsh inner critical voices. Physical symptoms can include sleep disturbances, fatigue, chronic pain, or digestive issues. Furthermore, they may use substances to regulate the nervous system. Because complex trauma affects both body and mind, recovery requires a holistic approach that addresses these symptoms on multiple levels. So now let's look at recovery from complex trauma. Before we dive deeper into the healing journey, let's clarify one thing. Recovery isn't about fixing yourself or striving to be normal. The concept of normal is very complicated when it comes to human existence. Our lived experience and cultural background highly influences what is normal or not. Healing is about personal growth, self-discovery, and embracing your full potential. It's about becoming more of who you truly are. This is why healing cannot be confined to rigid diagnostic criteria that ignore the context of trauma. Furthermore, traditional Western psychology tends to look at their concept as being superior to alternative healing approaches, which isn't true. Ideally, all approaches complement each other. In my recovery, I found approaches like systemic constellation and parts work were significantly far more effective for my healing than conventional psychotherapy. I also discovered Zen meditation and Ashtanga yoga, which integrated seamlessly in my recovery. I share this not to suggest a specific path, but to encourage you to explore what resonates with you. Healing is deeply personal, and your journey will unfold uniquely. Outdated psychological models have suggested that individuals with complex trauma can merely manage their symptoms. However, we now understand that this notion is false. With increasing research in neuroplasticity and neurogenesis, we recognize that the brain has a capacity for profound healing. Although this process requires patience and persistence, generations of people who overcame complex trauma have demonstrated that genuine and lasting healing is achievable, not solely through symptom management, but by reclaiming wholeness and meaning. What is recovery all about? My first invitation for you is that you start where you are. One of the most challenging yet powerful steps in healing is taking an honest look at where you are. How connected do you feel to your body? What emotional parts of you do you struggle with? What is your relationship with yourself like? How well can you regulate your emotions? What patterns do you see in your relationships? While it may feel uncomfortable to recognize gaps or difficulties, this awareness is where your power lies. Healing from complex trauma is like peeling an onion. Layer by layer, with time and persistence, you get closer to your authentic self. Furthermore, healing complex trauma is a transformational change process. There will be moments of difficulty, times when parts of you want to give up. That's why knowing your motivation matters. What drives you to begin this journey? For example, I started an intense healing process after my relationship fell apart. I noticed patterns that I didn't like, such as not respecting my boundaries or turning to self-injury when arguments became too intense. My motivation to heal myself was to build healthy relationships and be a healthy parent. I didn't want to pass down the patterns that had shaped. While my path didn't unfold the way I had hoped, the deeper drive to create healthy connections kept me going, even through grief and difficulty. So I invite you to explore your motivation. What is your why? What deeper reason keeps you moving forward even though healing feels tough. My third invitation is to view healing as a journey of growth. In fact, I would go as far to say that recovery is your hero's journey. Joseph Campbell's words, "The cave you fear to enter, hold the treasure you seek," deeply resonated with me during my recovery from complex trauma. Each time I faced the dark places of trauma, I was able to reclaim parts of me that had been lost. Healing isn't about self-judgment or labeling, but practicing curiosity, gentleness, and self-awareness. Instead of asking, "What's wrong with me?" consider asking, "What is happening inside me? What can I learn from this? What small shift could help me feel a bit better?" Treat your inner world with the same care and compassion you would offer to a dear friend. However, healing is also a paradox. Self-compassion and curiosity don't always come easily. Sometimes strong inner voices arise, voices that are critical or even carry self-hatred. In those moments, the practice isn't about forcing kindness. Instead, try turning curiosity towards those parts. What are they trying to protect? What do they need to be heard? Even the most painful inner voices often hold a message for us. If self-compassion feels out of reach, try being a neutral observer of your inner world. You don't have to force warmth or kindness. Simply witnessing your experiences without judgment can be a powerful first step. I also invite you to work towards inner attunement. Recovery involves reconnecting with your innate wisdom and shifting your focus from the external world to internal attunement. Even if it feels inaccessible now, trust that the inner wisdom exists within you. The journey starts with observing your emotions and physical sensations, learning to understand them and respond with care. Over time, the shift from an external locus of control to an internal one fosters deeper healing and resilience. Many practices support this process, whether it's meditation, yoga, self-reflection, somatic practices, or parts work. And many of them have roots beyond Western psychology. For example, when I began Zen meditation, it became a vital part of my healing journey, and I continue to practice it today. Many practices you engage in during recovery are not just part of healing. They are also part of living a healthy and fulfilling life. That said, for those with complex trauma, reconnecting with the body can be challenging. It's important to move at a pace that feels safe and to respect the parts of you that may fear being in your body. Healing is not about forcing yourself into discomfort, but about gently expanding your capacity to be present with yourself. Wherever you are on your journey, know that you can heal, grow, and move towards a more fulfilling life. Where to start when healing from complex trauma? First, I want to clarify how I use the term parts in this context. Parts refers to different aspects of your inner experience, your emotions, your roles, or parts of you that hold traumatic wounds. It's important to remember that these patterns are not your entire identity. They are simply parts of you. I hope this distinction makes sense. If you'd like to dive deeper into parts work, check out the episodes on parts work therapy. I leave a link in the bio. Healing from complex trauma shares a key element with trauma recovery, learning to regulate the nervous system. For deeper insights into this, you can check out the episode on polyvagal theory and the one about the window of tolerance. These episodes offer practices you can use to ground yourself. Since complex trauma often involves relational aspects, I encourage you to start with polyvagal theory, as it explains how your nervous system may respond to cues of danger in both your relationships and your environments. I'll include links to these episodes in the description for you. The next step in healing complex trauma is learning to recognize your different parts. This is a big topic, so in this episode, I'll focus specifically on parts that tend to form through relational wounding. So relational wounding is a core feature for complex trauma. Because of this, you likely have different parts, whether protective or wounded, that show up in your relationships. Some common parts include those that carry fear of abandonment or rejection, parts that want to avoid conflict or struggle to set boundaries, and parts that hold attachment wounds. You might also notice parts that are stuck in a trauma response. So some people may feel shut down, numb, and disconnected, what we call hypoaroused, while others may feel anxious, hypervigilant, or reactive, which is hyperaroused. Regarding attachment-related wounding, you may recognize parts that are anxiously attached, avoidantly attached, or parts that feel torn between the two, which is called disorganized attachment. It's also important to know that your parts may only show up in specific situations or when you are under stress. For example, if your partner has an anxiously attached part, it might trigger your avoidantly attached parts or vice versa. This can create confusing dynamics, but it's a valuable opportunity for you to learn about yourself. So the parts that show up in relationships may really depend on the attachment style of your partner. So if you have different partners, you may have very different experiences. In fact, starting a new relationship, ending one, or even considering leaving one can bring these parts to surface. These are often powerful times to get to know the parts of you that carry old wounds or protective patterns. Therefore, they are valuable opportunities to deepen your healing. Once you start recognizing a part, the next step is to build a relationship with it. Just imagine it like building a new friendship. You can do this by journaling with the part, talking to it with kindness, or even doing activities that the part likes to do. I go much deeper into how to work with your parts in future episodes. But if you'd like to get started, feel free to email me at nat@brighthorizontherapies.com, and I'll send you a free worksheet to begin this practice. If you want to learn more immediately, you can also listen to my earlier episode about parts for therapy. And if you're curious about how to calm and activate a part, please check out my episode on effective trauma counseling techniques. I'll share both links in the description. Many people with complex trauma struggle with feeling safe, and safety is a broad topic influenced by many factors, including your intersectionality. I won't be able to cover everything in this episode, but I plan to explore this more in the future. In general, physical safety is essential for your recovery journey. If you don't have an appropriate level of physical safety, the first step is to establish it. Additionally, it's important to avoid potentially dangerous situations as you begin your recovery, including distancing yourself from people who engage in abusive behaviors. So it's okay if you put in some distance and if you avoid certain people when you start your recovery. Once you have physical safety, the next step is to work on your boundaries and find practices to help you build inner safety. To assist with this, I leave a quiz in the description below to help you evaluate your boundaries. You can also explore various books on boundary setting. Plus, you can find a practice for increasing inner safety on the episode 5 Effective Trauma Counseling Techniques. So how does professional support for complex trauma look like? In general, it can be beneficial to find appropriate support if you recover from complex trauma. However, it can also be challenging since not every counselor is experienced in working with complex trauma. People usually have some painful experiences with past mental health professionals that makes it hard for them to reach out for help again. I hope that the following explanation helps you to find the support you deserve. Given that complex trauma often involves relational wounding, your mental health professional must be capable to foster a healthy and safe relationship with you. This goes beyond simply respecting your boundaries. It requires a counselor to model healthy relationship behaviors and create a space where trust can develop. A key aspect is their ability to manage the innate power imbalance in the therapeutic relationship healthily. If you belong to a group that faces systemic oppression, your counselor should be aware of their privilege and navigate these dynamics with sensitivity and accountability. In addition, a skilled therapist needs to regulate their autonomic nervous system to support co-regulation with you. For example, I tell my clients that there may be times when I intentionally trigger their autonomic nervous system, either through a specific action, a word, or maybe just being in the room, and that's okay. If this happens and the nervous system becomes dysregulated, my responsibility is to help them co-regulate, to create new possibilities and process the experience. Likewise, if my autonomic nervous system becomes dysregulated, we both risk falling back into habitual survival patterns, which may hinder the healing process in this moment. As outlined in polyvagal theory, the counselor must be able to nurture co-regulation. It is also important to note that working with complex trauma can sometimes activate the trauma counselor's own unresolved experiences. In such cases, a competent mental health professional must take responsibility for these activated parts of themselves ensuring that they don't interfere with the session. This self-awareness is vital for creating a truly healing environment. On a side note, let's look at the role of Zen meditation in trauma counseling. Research has shown that Zen meditation can be a valuable practice for mental health professionals. Studies suggest that clients of therapists who regularly engage in Zen meditation often experience better treatment outcomes. As a trauma counselor and coach who has practiced Zen meditation for many years, I'm always pleased to see research affirming what I've experienced personally. As I initially discovered Zen meditation in my recovery, I really noticed that it has become a steady and supportive companion on my daily life. My meditation practice helps me to stay present, calm, and grounded when I work with my clients. It allows me to hold space for their emotions and experiences without becoming overwhelmed and allowing me to remain responsible and attuned to their needs. Additionally, Zen meditation increases my self-awareness. It helps me notice and care for my emotional parts so that they don't unconsciously show up in the therapeutic space. The ongoing practice supports both my well-being and the well-being of my clients. So why does recovery from complex trauma need an individualized experiential approach? Unfortunately, the field of counseling still often favors a one-size-fits-all approach to trauma counseling. However, this method is seldom effective for complex trauma. Research indicates that clients experience better treatment outcomes and enhanced quality of care when they receive a personalized approach to trauma recovery. For this reason, it is essential to find a mental health professional who can integrate a variety of bottom-up, body-based, and top-down cognitive treatment approaches. To learn more about this, check out my episode, What are the Best Practices for Trauma Treatment? I will leave a link in the description. True trauma healing requires a holistic model, one that includes the body, mind, emotions, and even the imagination. Imagination is an often overlooked yet powerful tool in trauma recovery. It is important to remember that there is no single best trauma treatment. There is no hierarchy. The most effective approach is the one that works best for you, and it may shift as you move through the different stages of your healing journey. Why experiential healing matters. Trauma recovery is inherently experiential. It's not something that can be fully resolved by simply talking about the trauma. Healing happens through direct experience, through feeling, sensing, and connecting with what's happening at the moment. Experiential methods help people process trauma in the body, allowing them access emotions, sensations, and implicit memories that often can't be reached through words alone. Experiential approaches invite you to engage with your emotions, sensations, and body awareness. Furthermore, they focus on the here and now instead of retelling traumatic stories. They also encourage expression beyond language. They may use movement, art, imagery, or somatic awareness. Additionally, they guide you to access implicit memories that may be nonverbal. Last but not least, they increase awareness about trauma responses like fight, flight, freeze, and fawn, and work towards reconnecting you with a state of safety and connection. So here are some of the experimental approaches I often use and I recommend. Parts work therapy involves connecting with different parts of yourself, often included wounded, protective, or younger parts. While internal family systems, or so-called IFS, has become the most visible and widely marketed parts work model, there are many different approaches out there. Inner child work is one of them, and Janina Fisher's work also integrates parts work. While I draw from different parts work approaches, I often integrate it with EMDR to support more profound healing. I frequently use EMDR to help clients resolve traumatic experiences. EMDR stands for eye movement, desensitization, and reprocessing. However, EMDR alone is rarely enough to heal complex trauma. So in general, we can resolve the traumatic experiences. However, you need to be able to be in your window of tolerance for EMDR to really work. So therefore, it really requires a preparation phase. And it is also often useful to use parts work just also to work with your attachment and with your relationship with yourself. So I often integrate EMDR with parts work and somatic practices. Somatic approaches like somatic experiences or sensory motor psychotherapy help individuals reconnect with their bodies, notice sensation, and release stuck trauma energy. While I'm not formally trained in sensory motor psychotherapy, I've completed training by Janina Fisher, who uses this approach. I always approach this work very gently because reconnecting with the body can feel unsafe for people with complex trauma. So you really need to notice what's happening inside of you and respect those parts of you that may not want to be in the body or that may dissociate when you go too much in your body. So it can be sometimes a very gentle approach in very small doses. Systemic constellation work is an experiential method that enables you to feel and observe patterns of family and systemic trauma. Although this modality is often criticized by Western psychotherapy, it has been very transformative in my own healing journey. I later trained in this approach and I integrate it now alongside with parts work and EMDR. Expressive art therapy utilizes arts, movement, music, or writing to assist in processing emotions and trauma. These approaches provide a creative and nonverbal means to express feelings and memories that may not be accessible through conversations alone. I found art therapy very useful to connect with my younger parts and really dive deeper into different emotions. So many of the modalities I just explained to you, they include certain aspects of mindfulness because it's a basic to reconnect with your body. However, mindfulness can also go beyond this. So it includes yoga, breathwork, meditation, and guided visualization. Simple practices such as a safe place exercise can help you regulate your nervous system and promote healing over time. So my final thoughts on treatment for complex trauma. Healing from complex trauma is never a linear journey. It really requires a personalized, holistic approach that integrates the body, mind, and emotions. If you'd like to learn more about EMDR and parts work therapy and trauma recovery, I'll include the links in the description. So now let's look at some of the common challenges and myths around recovery from complex trauma. So the first myth is that we can just move on and get over it with willpower. A common myth is that we should just move on from trauma with sheer willpower. While it's understandable to want to move past what's happened, the reality is that healing requires processing and integrating what has occurred. Like the emotions and the body sensations that are stuck in your body, they really need to be processed, and we cannot get out of it on a rational way. Dependent on the severity of your experiences, some healing may happen on your own. So for example, one of my instructors, she said, like, as soon as you are outside of the traumatic situation, you already start recovering. And I think that is a beautiful thing to keep in mind. Even if you still have symptoms, a part of you is already recovering. So while some of the healing can happen on your own, it can be useful to have appropriate professional support because it can significantly help you in your healing journey, especially if you feel stuck. I would say it's important that is a support that is really knows how to work with complex trauma. One of the challenges is working with avoidant parts. It's normal to have parts that want to avoid the trauma, that want to avoid feelings. These parts are trying to protect you from the pain. While it's important to integrate these parts into the healing process, we must let them not to control our lives. These parts may resist trauma recovery or make excuses to avoid regular sessions. Getting curious about these parts and bringing them into your healing work with a mental health professional is key. It's not about eliminating them or overpowering them. It's really collaborating with them and understanding them better to find balance. Progress is more likely when we commit to regular sessions and start exploring these parts. So it's really when you notice there's a part of you that wants to avoid therapy or looking at trauma or recovery, please spend some time with the part and really get to understand its concerns. Another challenge is healing fatigue. Many people experience frustration or exhaustion in their healing journey from complex trauma. It's common that parts of you believe that you should be healed by now or that something is wrong with you if you're not progressing at this pace you expect. Remember that recovery doesn't mean that you'll never face challenges again, nor will it guarantee constant happiness. Emotions, both difficult and pleasant, are a very essential part of our human experience. They really guide us to understanding our needs and boundaries. So if you feel really frustrated, it's useful to explore it, but also be honest with yourself what has changed in your life. So for example, sometimes it happens a person is in trauma recovery, but then they lose an important relative or they have another traumatic experience. So these kind of factors may influence your recovery, and it doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you. It just life has happened and there is another thing you need to deal with. So I invite you to reflect also on incremental changes in your journey. Just like look at 1% improvements. This can really help you also to shift the focus from an unrealistic 0 to 100% mentality. It is more likely that the change will happen in small increment, even though sometimes you may notice you make profound changes. I also would like to invite you to really reflect on your journey. For example, every 6 months, sit down and really look back at the past 6 months and notice what has changed for you and what has improved. So do not only focus on the symptoms, but also look at the positive changes that happen in your life. Additionally, you can really define focus areas and focus on 2 areas or 1 area that you want to improve. And then it's easier for you to really see progress in this area. And internally, many topics are connected. So, for example, if you work on boundaries, you will also get to know those parts that are connected with setting boundaries. So, as a conclusion, complex trauma can leave deep marks on both the body and mind, but healing is possible. In today's episode, I explored why understanding the symptoms of complex trauma is an important step towards recovery, and also how these symptoms often serve as intelligent survival strategies. We also explore first steps for recovery, and I will continue to give you different aspects of trauma healing throughout this podcast and give you practical insights to support your journey. If you found this episode helpful, please subscribe to the podcast and share it with anyone who might benefit from it. If you have any questions or would like me to cover a specific topic in a future episode, please message me at nat@brighthorizontherapies.com. Remember, recovery is possible and you don't have to navigate this all alone.